Guys, we're talking the 102 tonight. Let's start with Superflex. Scott, you're on the clock at the 102. Bijan, of course, was taken right in front of you. Who are you going at 102?
I guess if I have to make a pick right this second, can't trade, can't move, can't sit for 3 months and figure out who I want to take, I'll probably just take C.J. Stroud. I'll take C.J. Stroud. I don't like Shane's face. I think Shane would take C.J. Stroud as well. But I think it's a good spot to be because you control basically what everyone else needs below you. You kind of have the leverage to say, what happens if all these quarterbacks don't land in spots that people like and the market's not extremely excited to draft all of them because they all have some profile holes? Then you can just pivot to the running back 2 or the wide receiver 1. I'm very confident there's going to be another skill player that people are going to go, wow, this is a top 2 or 3 round startup pick. You know, it's not the 101, but it's a pick I feel very confident having extremely high value to start. So that's a good place to be. If you need a quarterback, it's a perfect place to be. If you don't need a quarterback, something we're going to talk about, you have all the leverage for everybody below you. It might end up, we right now say there's 4 quarterbacks that are going to go in the top 15. I happen to have them all basically valued at like 102 to 106. But there's going to be people at 106 that are pissed off that they have to take the QB4 because they think the QB4 sucks. They don't even count that as a quarterback. They're not eyeing that quarterback. They're going, I need Bryce Young. I need C.J. Stroud. I need to move up into the top 3 or 4. Again, the person at the 102 has all the control over those types of moves as well. And I think Shane would even agree. I'd love a deal where I pick up an extra first and I get the 106 on top to give up the 102. Like that's historically the smash type of deal where you're getting the 2 for 1. You're getting first round assets. And all you're doing is losing the pick of the players that you want. And it's January right now. So it's not like the players that we're saying really mean a whole lot because a lot's going to change. So great position to be at the 102, but I would take Stroud if I was forced to choose a player.
Shane, you're on the clock, 102.
Scott is just looking at this all wrong. Just so Captain Negative, Negative Nancy, Negative Nero. Oh, I guess I'll take CJ Stroud.
What was negative about what I said?
Because she said, oh, I guess I'll take CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud and Bryce Young are 1,001 times percent better, check the math, than the Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis, Sam Howell, Matt Corral debacle that we just endured. They're like a tier below Trevor Lawrence, which means they're like uber good. Either of these guys could be a top 12 quarterback. I think what we saw from CJ Stroud in the Georgia game was exciting. We've seen what Bryce Young can do, assuming that he doesn't get broken in half on the field. I think he's going to be a top 12 quarterback. And you're in a position of power. Everyone below me needs to come to me. No, they're not getting Bijan, but do they want Jahmyr Gibbs? Do they want a premier running back that's also a pass catching threat that's been comped to Alvin Kamara? Skill-wise, a little lighter. Do they want the quarterback? Maybe I don't need a quarterback. Well, you still got to come through me to get Gibbs or to get one of those quarterbacks. But yes, if I get traded for the 106 and the 24 first, done.
The 102 or the 108 and 110?
I think I'd probably lean the 102 right now because it feels like I can get a similar deal. Even if it's not the 110, feels like I can get the 108 and a wide receiver 2/3 or a running back 2 or something that fits that value of the 110. I feel like that's on the table at all times. And it really isn't even about CJ Stroud. It's about I'm giving up the potential. All we need is one more asset in this draft to have whatever type of combine / draft capital / landing spot for everyone to go, holy shit, I need that player. All of a sudden, there is going to be another player or two in this class that is close to a first round startup pick when we get to draft time. Might not be top 12, but early to mid second of a startup, people are going to be going CJ Stroud, QB 11, CJ Stroud, QB 10, Jahmyr Gibbs, running back 5, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, wide receiver 7, like it can get to that point. I want that 102 in that circumstance because I can leverage the value. So now I'm not taking the too late first right now or the 108 and 110. No.
By the way, if you're enjoying this content, if you wouldn't mind looking down, hitting that little thumbs up, giving us a like, easiest way to help out our channel. We'd appreciate that. Shane, which side are you taking on that? 102 or 108 and 110?
102, because I'm probably most likely trying to add something to that 102 to get a premier asset. I won't say the 102 can get you Kyler Murray, but I know from the offers I put out there that it's close enough that people think about it for a little bit. So knowing that I could get what's a top 8 dynasty quarterback, even coming off a down season, using the 102 and something else, I want to hold on to the 102 and see if I can get like Scott said, a premier asset. Like I'd rather add to that and just get something really good as opposed to trading back again, unless it's start 12 or 13 and getting a couple of, I don't want to say middling assets, but assets that obviously aren't top tier, because if they were, you won't be taking them at 108 and 110.
So we've been encouraging our subscribers, if they have, something 110, 111, 112, to try to kick that to 2024. What if I told you that you could have the 108 and a 24 first? Would you take that over the 102 or still no?
Done. Yeah. The mystery box is the 24 is what makes it great, right? Because it could end up being worse than the 110, but for at least the next 8, 9, 10, not 12 months, because that would be too many, but probably the next 10 months, that pick could be anywhere in anyone's mind. And I can use that as a fungible asset. It's fungible because it doesn't have anything attached to it. There's no way to know what it's going to be for at least another 9, 10 months.
Yeah, I mean, the average value of a random future first. Again, we attach the word random to these picks, but then a lot of times you study them in a little closer and you're like, all right, I can probably tier these teams in buckets of like dog shit teams, elite teams, and then everybody else in the middle. If you're just talking about like that, everybody else in the middle, which honestly in most of our leagues is probably 7, 8, 9 teams, right? Like there might be one powerhouse and then one team where it's like, yeah, that team's going to be the 101 or 102 again next year. But everyone else in the middle, I mean, the average value of that pick is probably around like the 107 or so in a Superflex. So if you can get one of those picks for the 110, instead, in this trade, you're getting the 24 first instead of the 110. It's a little bit more extra value. And the flexibility, actually, to Shane's point, as soon as the tiers start to emerge, we're going to get early tiers after the Senior Bowl. Then we're going to get more tiers after the Combine. People are going to start counting like where they're going to consider like the elite players.
Right.
Once you start getting to that and it starts to become a consensus, then that 110 can either gain a lot of value or in some circumstances, it loses a little value. That future 24 first, as soon as players start getting popped into that range, people are going to go, man, kind of like that random 24 first, especially how many times in our roster reviews, Shane, do we say, if you can stack those 24 firsts, it's the same as stacking the 23 first.
Yeah.
If I'm in 10 leagues, I would rather have, if I have 25 firsts in 10 leagues, I'd rather have 4 of them in 6 leagues. And then have a couple other leagues where I've just traded away my picks to try to win. Like I'd rather cluster them because then it gives me odds of, man, this league I have the 102 and the 103 and the 107 and the 109. Like I have a ton of leverage in the next draft. So yeah, I mean, if you can get a third 24 first in a league, like you're even more incentivized to do that versus taking the 223 picks.
Right. It's more valuable than a normal 24 first, if you will. All right, guys, let's switch over to 1 QB for a bit. Who are you taking at 102 and 1 QB?
Jahmyr Gibbs or Jordan Addison, maybe Jaxon Smith-Njigba. It's a full PPR.
It's a full PPR.
Any PPC?
No PPC.
Probably Jordan Addison or Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Depending on who's drafted first. Now, we'll go Jahmyr Gibbs if Quentin Johnston's the first wide receiver drafted in the class.
Let me hop in real quick. Let's say you are stacked at running back and you don't have wide receivers. Is that going to make a difference? Do you like to draft best player available, or are you going to take whatever fills a need?
So the only time I'm going to reach for a player, it's going to be a running back. I'll admit that. And the only time it's going to be a running back is when the rest of my roster is stacked. And I've built my roster in such a way that my running backs are like, I'm going in the next year and I'm like, oh, okay, I got Tariq Cohen, Devin Singletary, Kareem Hunt, and Boston Scott again, huh? Okay. At that point, I'd go, you know what? We're going to lean Gibbs here over Addison or Jackson or JSN. Usually, I would say if it's close, that's fine. But if it's like miles apart, then you shouldn't reach. You should just go best player available.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting one because I think the market consensus is going to be, man, I'm still scared of taking a running back, especially a running back that might show up the combine and barely 200 pounds. Like to immediately assume that guy is just automatic 102 over Here's the thing with the receiver. If Jahmyr Gibbs comes out and he's good, but he's not amazing, the receiver is going to hold a little more value, especially if they have like kind of an ascension similar to like Jalen Waddle or Garrett Wilson. Like next year, you're going to be holding the asset that you'd rather have the entire year from a trade perspective. So really it has to be a team where you say my roster construction is ready for taking the big shot on a running back. Because even on the open trade market, I think there are going to be people that go, I'd rather have the receiver. Like I think if you say, can I trade the 102 for a top 8 dynasty receiver? I think Shane would say that's a smash to do. But I could also argue that Jordan Addison, Jaxon Smith-Njigba are the exact same thing as Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. You just literally haven't seen him play yet. Now there is a little risk there. But like I talked about on my DD show last night, like Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson are good, but I'd also argue that they're like capped entirely for dynasty value right now. They're wide receiver 8 through 20. That's probably where they're going to stay. They're already valued there. And we know a receiver that's good from this class that everyone has liked for 2 years, aka Addison and JSN. Like all they need to do is have a couple good games. Boom. Man, they're wide receiver 5 in dynasty. Like it's going to be that quick. So I think I would take the receiver right now just based on that part, but there's going to be rosters where, man, yeah, I have a running back room, like Shane said. Maybe not the Tariq Cohen part. That's a little, that's not even one I'll roster, and I roster over 110 running backs, but he's not one of them. But those rosters, I can see people go, you know what? I probably have some other picks. I can get wide receiver 7 with my 202. I'll just take the running back. I think if he hits his ceiling, could be the 20+ point per game receiving monster, and I'll just take my chances. And I know 6 months, if he's playing like James Cook, I've lost. I'm never, because once you start out like James Cook, and I'm not saying James Cook isn't good, but once you start out like a little bit bad at running back, you're cooked. You're never going to come back to where people are throwing you top 10 receivers and bailing you out.
Is Jahmyr Gibbs, so let's just put this in this context, is he closer to JT or is he closer to James Cook as far as pedigree, how he's viewed in the market or how he's viewed in the community, right? Because part of James Cook's problem is that, I don't want to say like cult guy, but he was definitely like Rocky Horror Picture Show, right? Like it was definitely like a few of us that were like, no, this is great. You need to check it out. And most people were like, that looks awful. I don't want to watch that. So then when he started out bad, people were like, see, I told you that he was bad. So they didn't notice that he was like one of the league leaders in yards per touch. And it didn't matter that, he stole a bunch of work from Devin Singletary in the playoffs. Whereas JT started off slowly in his rookie year. But the entire time that he started slowly, except for some doofuses that were like, oh, I told you it was a bust. Most people were like, all right, just hold on. It's coming. So I guess it's really, where do we see Gibbs in that spectrum?
I think you make a good point too, that a lot of times with rookies, the reason people didn't value James Cook probably where they should have, they still wouldn't expected him to go in the second round. So when he does, It was a fluke. Everyone kind of expects Jahmyr Gibbs to go in the top 50. He could, I don't think he's a first rounder, but I wouldn't be shocked if he's a high second rounder, and that's not going to be shocking to people. So I think he's going to hold more like Jonathan Taylor from a pedigree standpoint. He's just not going to have the same exact profile to where there are going to be naysayers that exist before he even comes into the NFL. And that's going to be 2, 3, 4 people in your league that are going to be going, I'm not sure about this guy. If he was put it this way, if you told me right now Zach Charbonnet was the RB2 and he was going to go in the late first, and he's 6'1", 225 pounds, running a sub 4.5, and he's had the pedigree for 3 years, like Jahmyr Gibbs, that's a guy I'd go, I don't really care where he gets drafted. If he goes in the early second and He's a clear-cut bell cow running back, people will continue to come back to that. So that's my only drawback on Jahmyr Gibbs, but it's a good problem to have, because if you have the 102 and you don't trade it, like, you're going to get to pick this. You're going to get to wait and see what happens. And you're going to have access to a player that I think we're all confident one of these 3 that we're talking about are going to end up having extremely high value going into the draft.
Guys, if you're in a 1 QB start 8 half PPR, is that going to make you want to lean Jahmyr Gibbs if you're on the fence at all between Gibbs and a receiver, assuming decent landing spots across the board?
Well, here's the thing about Gibbs, though, is a lot of his value is going to come from the receiving work. So that actually, to me, is almost, I don't want to say a wash. Like, I can't imagine he's going to be a guy that gets 20 rushing attempts ever in his life in a game. A lot of his work is going to come from the passing attack. So I think that actually makes me want to lean the wide receiver a little more, depending on the wide receiver type.
I think it just makes him a little slightly riskier profile. Like you're like, well, I need him to go to somewhere where they're going to maximize the passing game. Has to be probably a good offense. It probably has to be a quarterback willing to throw it to a running back. Like there's just other factors where you're like, I'm just not willing to bet as much because there are some bad spots probably that he could go to. And we'd be like, I don't know about that. Because ultimately, I mean, the odds you're going to just keep getting running backs in the draft that end up 20 plus points per game, like that's low. There's maybe one per class. It's not even guaranteed Bijan hits those numbers. So I think sometimes we move the goalposts a little bit. And really what we're chasing at running back is how do I find a, Tony Pollard or better type producer? That's kind of what you hope Jahmyr Gibbs is. You hope he's Tony Pollard 2022. Now you might sit here and go, wow, yeah, he should be better than Tony Pollard, right? But is it ever guaranteed that he's going to have a 19 point per game season?
Yeah, Tony Pollard is the running back 6. You get a running back 6 season out of Jahmyr Gibbs. I get what you're saying.
But that's what you want out of Jahmyr. The price is already expected that he's going to be better than a guy like Tony Pollard, and he's younger. Doesn't have a broken leg now. But the idea is we're sitting here going, oh, he's clearly better than Tony Pollard. What if he's not? What if he's just another solid weapon running back that a team uses a high second-round pick on? And then they're like, yeah, he probably has some limitations. We just need to find a way to maximize him. I don't want to compare him to somebody like Cam Akers, but what if he's like another Cam Akers? A little undersized, like you think he's a little better. He's obviously better in the receiving game, but like if you can go back in time and say, that's all I'm getting out of a running back, what are the odds that you draft a Le'Veon Bell, a Christian McCaffrey, a Saquon Barkley? Like those are really low. It's almost like if you don't get those, why really ever bother taking them in rookie drafts? Like that's kind of why I'm talking myself out of drafting Gibbs, simply because it feels like I can go buy Ramondre Stevenson, Tony Pollard, one of those guys, and I'd never have to risk the 102. I can take the top receiver off the board, a top 15 receiver in the NFL draft that I like. I like his profile. I'm very confident even at worst. He ends up Brandon Ayuk or Devontae Smith or Jerry Jeudy. I'm still probably getting a top 24 receiver, even if it's just, JSN is just a guy or Jordan Addison's just a guy. So I think I'm talking myself more into taking the receiver now, right, as long as I know they get the capital. And I think we're pretty confident they're going to.
Yeah, the more that I've been looking at it for the last, I want to say 2 to 3 weeks, feels like it's been forever. But yeah, I've been like, I don't know about Jahmyr Gibbs, especially in Superflex. Like I'm almost 1,000% certain I'm not taking Jahmyr Gibbs in any Superflex. And even in 1 QB, it's like, I think I kind of like the wide receivers better.
Superflex. Let's talk about if you don't want to draft Stroud or Young, whoever your QB1 is going to be, would you rather have the 102 or Kyler Murray?
Kyler Murray.
Yeah, I'm still in on Kyler, even more so than I was like a month ago when I thought you could have bought him lower. Like I think in a lot of cases I would still take Kyler there, especially if I'm in a situation where I've already explored all my options for the other quarterbacks. Like this might be the best. This is the one access point to an elite guy, and it probably means everybody else has already turned me down. So I know Shane would rather send the 102 for Trevor Lawrence and add something, but that's not always plausible. So Kyler might be the best one available.
Thing is, you're probably going to need to add something to the 102 either way. And
maybe not for Kyler though. That seems to be more like a coin flip one.
I'll say this: in the leagues that I'm in, that I tried that, I specifically tried the 102 for Kyler, and I was told not enough.
What about Dak Prescott?
I think I'd rather take the shot on Stroud or Bryce Young. Dak Prescott is that Kirk Cousins QB1, where he's a back-end QB1. Let's not degrade him, but the ceiling is a little lower.
Yeah, I think after yesterday, it's not anything against Dak. I think Dak still belongs where he is right now. Like he's still probably by default QB 10, QB 11 in Dynasty. But it kind of feels like after yesterday, I mean, obviously they lose, so he gets blamed. I mean, he didn't play well, but when the quarterback loses, he's going to get blamed. And so there's whispers about how Dak, he can renegotiate his contract after 2023. Dallas isn't going to keep him if he doesn't win a Super Bowl, which that's kind of ridiculous because only one quarterback a year wins the Super Bowl, and they're not on track to be the best team in the league next year. So it's like, what do you really expect, But I think it's also fair to say if he's on the Kirk Cousins path where it's like, okay, if Dak doesn't blow up next year, then his future is in question. And I think with the Cowboys, that's fair to say that if he has another year like this year, next year, it will be Dallas has to move on from him. They can't pay him 42 to 45 million a year, and that gets in the mind of dynasty managers. And so I think now it's like for the next 6 months, people would rather take the QB1 of this class, no matter who it is, over Dak, because it feels like until he plays again, whoever that QB1 is, it's going to be like, I'd rather have him. It's the same as what we did with Fields and Lance a couple years ago. They immediately jump into the top 10 in the offseason. And then once like Lance doesn't play and Fields plays and he's terrible, it's like, oh man, all these other guys way ahead of him because they're scoring points. Russell Wilson's got to go ahead of them. Tua's got to go ahead of them. And so, I think that's where Dak is. I think Shane nailed it. He's a fancy Kirk Cousins, and I have to give credit to Shane. He's been saying that all season.
Yeah, we always talk about live assets, and Dak doesn't seem like he's a live asset anymore. He doesn't seem like he's ever going to have that big value bump. Whereas, if you hit on one of these lottery ticket young QBs, then different story. So let's talk about what you need to add on to the 102 to get Bijan Robinson. Okay, so you're taking the 101 or the 102 and the 107 in a Superflex.
101.
If I could split Bijan for the 102 and the 107, I think I'm doing it. Obviously, I prefer 24 first and the 107, but 102 and 107 is pretty good. Pretty good. I'm walking away with C.J. Stroud and Zach Charbonnet / Sean Tucker / Zach Evans / whoever the class has decided is the RB3, if not a wide receiver.
I think to be fair, you got to listen to the first video that we did. And is your team ready for the 101? Right. There are teams where it's a start 10. I have a stacked roster. I have the 101. There's no point in me exploring the pivot down unless it is this really helps me on both ends. I'd want the will you trade me the Travis Etienne in the 102 for Bijan, like that type of deal. Like, okay, you're going to do that almost in any circumstance. But here, I think it does depend. I would lean not doing that right now because why? That's my only pushback on Shane is doesn't it feel like you can get that deal in a couple months, or do you think it might be a one-time offer where that team pulls the plug and they don't offer it again? I mean, what do you think would change in the next couple months? Like what could go wrong for that 101 side?
In theory, nothing should go wrong, right? Like there's nothing that could happen unless Bijan goes out there and, let me knock on wood before I say this, tears an ACL in a pro day or something. Although I can't imagine he's doing any physical activity between now and okay, so let's say it was more likely he tears his knee walking into a Dunkin' Donuts because he should not touch a football field in any manner. I
think it's more likely that the 102 elevates itself to where people go, oh, I'm really excited about that 102, right? Like there's a clear 102 and now everyone views that pick as higher valued compared to Bijan versus Bijan falls. That's where I think you could get burned is if a clear 102 emerges and everyone in the community is on board with like you said, CJ Stroud. He's the guy. He's going to be the 101. They're going to draft him. It's going to be the spot. That's when people may back off a little bit, especially if it's a quarterback.
Yeah.
So we'll do a few quick hitters here, different positions, buying vets outright with a 102. Would you rather have Jalen Waddle or the 102 in the Superflex?
Easy pick.
Yeah, pick.
Would you rather have Amon-Ra St. Brown or the 102?
Pick. Only receiver I'd consider trading would be
CeeDee Lamb.
Lamb's the only one you could even consider, and I think I'd still take the pick probably.
Yeah, I think we get to the 103. Oh, that's what we call a teaser. I think it's the 103 before I start looking at wide receivers, not by the name of Chase and Jefferson for this pick.
How about Breece Hall or the 102?
I'd still take the 102, but I mean that's probably the only running back you could see somebody justifying doing the trade, and that's going to be a requirement that like we see Breece Hall doing something on video by like March.
Yeah, right.
I'm taking the 102 again. The flexibility that can be anything.
The 102 or Kyle Pitts and the 111
pick. I think we probably overvalue this 102 simply because it gives me access to quarterbacks where not a lot of their assets do. That's the only thing. Now they could get burned, but it gives me a path to a quarterback in a deal. Even if it's not like the top 8 or 9 quarterbacks, I have access to Dak and Kyler and those guys, and I can work a deal. I don't think you go to somebody with Breece Hall and you're like, hey, can I get Kyler Murray? I feel like you have a better shot when you have the pick, especially if they don't have like 2 elite quarterbacks. They may be looking at that going, okay, This is Dak versus C.J. Stroud. I'll take C.J. Stroud. Dak versus or Kyler Murray versus C.J. Stroud. I'll take C.J. Stroud. Like, you have a better chance of doing that when you're trying to give a player.
Right.
Yeah, I'm going with the 102.
Hopefully this video is getting people pumped up about the 102, but when should we be selling this thing? You know, it's burning a hole in people's pockets. When is a good time, unless you're getting a very strong offer right now for the 102, kind of timeline wise, when should we be looking to move the pick?
I would say after the combine, right? But outside of measurements, we don't really get much out of the combine, out of the elite guys, right, anymore. So maybe after the pro days, either after the combine and or pro days, the 102 is going to rise in value, like Scott said. But CJ Stroud goes out there and we hear about how much the coaches love him on the whiteboard. We don't know what that means, but we're like, cool, the coaches loved him on the whiteboard. Yeah, he's really impressing people. When Bryce Young has done nothing but drink milkshakes and weighs in at 203 at the combine, right? You know, and we're like, hey, he looks a little flabby, but he's 203. Suddenly that, you know, oh, no, I really like Bryce Young a lot more. So I think after the combine is probably when it's going to peak.
Yeah, we see a lot of things change with quarterbacks from now until the draft time. Like, it's always the quarterbacks are going to go high. There's going to be 4 quarterbacks in the top 15. So if that kind of tapers off, you know, maybe Richardson falls out a little bit, because there have been people that still say I wouldn't take him in the first round. Like, he's too much of a project.
Yep.
So maybe that tapers back a little bit. And we see where some of the coaches land in terms of hiring on these teams. I think a lot of people are kind of a little hesitant at the top right now because it's like, I don't know who the Colts are going to hire. I don't know who the Texans are going to hire. That's probably going to be the favorites for the 2 top quarterbacks, those 2 landing spots. And people want to see who the coaching staffs are going to be. You know, what's the plan from the coaching staffs too. So I think once that happens, like as Shane said, I don't think the combine gives us much for quarterbacks. I think it's just like they're checking the boxes. Same with the Senior Bowl, you know, and a lot of quarterbacks are not going to the Senior Bowl this year. So it's like by March, we're going to have no more information other than just draft talk. So maybe by then we get a little more movement, but that's probably because the rest of the class starts to shape up a little bit around them.
Tier break wise, where do we see the 2023 tier break to where you would want to punt to 24 as of January when we're recording this? 107, did I hear you say, Shane?
Right now, yeah, 107 feels like. After 106, I'm kind of like, all right, I'm out. Peace out, 107. But you know what I mean? At this point last year, we thought it was the 105, right? I kept moving it back as the season or the offseason progressed. So right now, 107 sounds about right.
I think that's probably the point where you're getting like the average value of the pick you're trading away is probably around the 107. I do think this class, if I had to say right now, truly, if I just went by my own personal evaluation, I would say the 109, but that's because I think you're going to see the 4 quarterbacks go. There's 3 receivers that I think are going to go in the top 20, 25 picks. And then you're going to have Bijan and Gibbs. So that's 9 right now that I think the community would say it's really easy for me to pick. Even if I don't like Will Levis or Anthony Richardson or Quentin Johnston, if I'm sitting at the 108 and I'm doing like a mock draft, I'm just going to take those guys because I'm pretty confident in their draft pedigree. Now, by the time we get to rookie draft time, you might go, well, the tier was 108. Everyone wants out after the 107. So I wish I would have dealt that 108 and that 109 for the 24 first. And I think you're safe doing that because it just on average, you're getting better value in a 24 first than you are at the 109. But I could also see where that 108 becomes the tier break or the 109 becomes the tier break. And you go, I don't hate trading the 24 first back in to get one of those players. So I'd say right now it's the 109, but I mean, how many questions do we get where someone has, you know, they have the 109, the 111 and the 112? Like the odds probably say that those are all going to be in their own tier themselves. And you have 3 of the 4 picks. You probably can't sell the 112 for a 24 first. Try, obviously, but when you get declined, try the 111. If you get declined, I'm okay doing the 109. The process is taking care of itself. You still have 2 of those picks to use. You just kind of hope there's a little chaos in your draft and maybe a player or 2 falls to you. So I think all 3 are safe to do it, but right now I'd say the 109.